Hello and welcome to the Roundtable Podcast. Tonight, between Drewish and I, are going to be having a discussion on how any person adopts worldviews, specifically focusing on pill theory, red pill, blue pill, black pill, etc. Red pill, through the lens of the movie The Matrix, taking the red pill means a person is awake, aware to the true reality of how our society works. Or taking the blue pill is the desire and motivation of being a part of the masses, credulant, willfully ignorant, a useful idiot who has a facade of critical thinking. For instance, when Cypher in The Matrix, being aware of the of the reality, um, goes to such great lengths to become part of the masses again that he betrays his own family to achieve that goal. Drewish and I both have different views as to what these things are and how they work. So I really want to get into it. And maybe Drewish, do you want to just start with what you think they are and how they work?
Sure. Thanks, Thorsen. Um, yeah, the pill theory is a sort of a categorization that's become pretty popular on the internet, at least presently. Um, the Matrix is the popularizing, or the advent of it with the red pill and the blue pill, where the line is the blue pill. You wake up tomorrow and wonder if this is just a dream, and the red pill, Morpheus shows you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Another um, big thing with that was the movie The Red Pill, which dealt specifically with a filmmaker who defined herself as a feminist, who was then doing a sort of a men's rights movement documentary, who then, over the course of making the documentary, changed her perspective on feminism, sort of went native, if you will, in that regard. But generally speaking, yeah, the as for people who are not conformist with society in some kind of ideological way, either how they perceive the world or what they value or what they trust, if they're counterculture in some kind of uh, in some intellectual or idealistic way, they promote themselves as being red pilled. Now, this isn't to say that the red pill is necessarily correct in all regard. Like, someone could be red pilled in the sense that they go against what society believes on or what is prevailing wisdom of the culture that they live in, where the prevailing wisdom of the culture is actually correct on something. I tend to view red pill um, not necessarily in the means of being willing and capable of reflecting upon what is the case, and more in terms of contrarian views. Not to say that you are contrarian and that's why you're red pilled, but just in terms of, do you believe what society tells you on this? Yes, you're blue pilled. No, you're red pilled, which isn't to say anything, at least to me, about the truthfulness of those claims, because there's certain different areas where I would describe myself as blue pilled over red pilled, depending upon whether I conform to the so cultural zeitgeist. But I think that's enough of my introduction on this. So back to you, Thorson.
Yeah, man, there's really good points. I think there's a lot of areas here that we really agree on what these things are and how they work. I'm wondering from what I think a lot of different pop culture movies are trying to do is push forward many different ideas like the Matrix is trying to do here with this philosophy of being aware of the nature of reality and that there's actually something more sinister going on. Like, so in the movie The Matrix, human beings are controlled by robots that, and then the human beings live inside of this incredible like matrix, that this simulation where, and our actual physical bodies in reality are you being used as batteries for our overlords who control us. And so being red pilled means you are waking up and becoming aware of this fact of what the actual reality is within inside of the framework of the mythos of the Matrix movie. And being blue pilled is not knowing this at all and just going back into the simulation and just let things be fine and be how they are, especially, again, with the example of Cypher. betraying his own family after already being aware of all of this. He didn't want the shitty life of and thinking there's no hope. And I think this is one of the things that comes into play with a lot of this, and that overarching thing of that what is this, the status quo is and what society promotes us to be right and wrong and true. It feels like a lot of this constantly comes back. In my view, it's this because like Catholicism versus science problem that we have in our society that seems like we haven't got rid of, to where even today the mainstream media is like Catholicism in so much that or no, the elite of the Catholicism and mainstream media are the priests that are pushing the narrative and forcing people to conform to ideology. And then so in this respect of like us being used as batteries, we're all credulant, willfully ignorant, useful idiots that help that machine to keep going, to where the elite get to stay in power. We're not. And so I view Red Pill as this person that's woken up for this, that sees that the elite are in control. They constantly make and dictate everything that we want, and we're like these useful and so they get to and then so being red pill is being aware of this, and blue pill is no, there's no way that's possible, and my authority figures are great and amazing and they would never do anything wrong. And it's like this optimism bias and rationality bias, like everything's rational and everything's fine, thing to where aspect to it as well.
I mean, that's some. One moment. That's some. There's a lot of conclusions that are wrapped up into that. Because I mean, in the Matrix, there was a truth, which was that you were living in this simulated world, which you would get if you went deeper into it. Um, but like what you were saying with the elites and so on and so forth, I mean, there are plenty of people who believe that the media lies to them, but also think that this is largely due to various incentives, just promoting a certain thing, and has nothing to do with any form of centralized control. Uh, and so it's one of those things where um, what you, it's tough because if you're quote unquote red pilled on any particular issue, you think you have a truth that society doesn't have, or by and large, the vast majority of people in society do not yet know, or have not yet seen, or it's not acceptable to discuss. And so you then almost innately want to wake other people up, want to them to see the truth, and so on and so forth. But there's a danger, getting back to what I was saying, is in that um, just because you think you have this special knowledge doesn't mean it's actually real knowledge. Or just because not everything is a binary situation. If the accepted narrative is incorrect, that doesn't mean every alternative to that is correct. Just because that's wrong doesn't mean you have the correct answer in response. And so the there is this sort of the incentives that lead someone to be blue pilled on something um, are manyfold, but they could just be, conformist, or why even bother thinking about that? Or I just haven't bothered to think about that. There could be something you're unaware you're blue pilled because you didn't even think it was something even worth questioning or thinking about or reflecting upon. Um, Whereas, yeah, if you're red pilled on something, oh, you're going to care about it. You're going to be invested in it. Um, and if you're right, good for you. You put the time and the effort into becoming informed about it. But if you're wrong on it, oh man, your ego is tied up with it at that point. Like now there's a real big issue if you're actually wrong in the area you're red pilled on.
Yeah, which is why epistemology is extremely important, that we can discern opinion from justified belief of all these different metrics of how we measure any of those things to ensure if we're saying, no, I know I'm right here, this is exactly how this works, we're able to see that. It's one of the many things that we're dealing with in all of this, like even to the point of where a lot of the language of how red pill is being used today at least from my view, what I'm seeing is individuals are using it for almost becoming Republican. Like they woke up from the Democratic Party and the lies that the left. Like I see this a lot. Like this, there's actually this big. I don't know if any of you have seen this, or you specifically Jewish as well. But this, like, I watch a lot of Tim Pool podcasting. There's a lot of people that come on there that speak exactly like this. Like there's a woman who's a lesbian who woke up from the woke culture and the left side, and doing that becomes red pilled, and too many people conflate it with becoming Republican, which I'm not saying that she is. I'm saying this is, like, again, the narrative that people do, and it makes us think in this binary way where, yeah, we did learn some new things. We were able to come up with a better perspective. We saw problems elsewhere, and then we now think that we're a good person again now when we thought before. We still lack the ability to be truly red pilled in the manner of, maybe it's purple pilled, of being able to look at any scenario and with a better lens of high levels of standards of epistemology, how to arrive at that truth, and how to do that inside of environments like between you and, or inside of this community where you can have your ideas exchanged upon, and see where you're right and where you're wrong and how we arrive at these things, and that this very binary thing of right versus left, but also red pill versus blue pill, not being aware, knowing how to be aware of things, the exact opposite happens. So instead of being blue pilled and being willfully ignorant and not knowing hardly anything at all to the truth of reality, being able to actually know it, being red pilled, and a person, this is a very binary thing where a person then thinks, oh, I just know everything and I know how it all works, and I'm just, oh, and they arrive at conclusions is still, again, too simply, which is, I think, a thing that we're constantly seeing inside of our society, that people arrive at really hard conclusions with a great deal of arrogance in their voice of how something fucking works.
I think that there's you have to understand that there are different reasons why people change their mind about stuff. Like one of the biggest reasons that people believe what they believe, and one of the biggest reasons they change their mind, is social acceptance. They're not necessarily looking for the truth. They're looking for what gets them in, what gets them a community. There's an evolutionary reason for it. And rejection by community, or it's like you just being willing to have like an independent thought where you're like, well, are we right about this? What about this? And they don't even realize what the consequences of that will be, and then facing that rejection is a huge impetus for why a lot of people change their mind. But you have to understand that doesn't mean that these people are largely driven by a desire to reach the truth and to appraise their ideas in open debate and discussion. No, they change their ideas when they stop being useful to them, when they stop working, when they hit a huge life changing roadblock or some tragic thing that the worldview and narrative they have just doesn't make sense for, didn't prepare them for, didn't help to prevent, and that's when they will often change their mind. Yeah, so I think that you're believing that a lot of people are changing their mind because they earnestly want to find the truth, when really these are tribalists who were in a tribe, who are now just adopting a different tribe for largely psychological reasons. And the only difference between them and someone who's blue pilled is the social zeitgeist. And once the social zeitgeist changes because enough of them have moved over into a new tribe, they will be as blue pilled as ever.
I agree. There's so much there. Like it's really wonderful speaking to individuals like yourself. It's so wonderful to hear, like, some of the same thoughts that we see this thing where hear the thoughts that we also have had. It's really wonderful. I agree with you that social acceptance is incredibly important. Key behavioral motivator here that we need to be able to understand really well. I think there's a thing to add on here about understanding who gets to control what is valued in terms of any amount of dissenting opinions in any environment. So let's say we go to a room of fourth wave feminists having a conversation. What is allowed to be talked there? If there are some dissenting opinions that do arise by anybody, what happens? How are those dealt with? And I think we can again point out here, and I'm not even just trying to pick on fourth wave feminists. I'm not against fourth wave feminism. I'm not against women. I'm just using just an example. We can go to an example of a room of Trump supporters having a conversation. So when standards are not well understood of what words mean, how do we arrive at concepts, so many different heuristics and how these things work. I'm 44 years old, and for the vast majority of my life, most of these things were all like I understood very little of these things, like 2% probably. I just wanted to willfully ignorant, constantly, just being taught enough to become a protective member of society and a useful idiot. I wasn't aware of a huge list of biases and all of these different ways that we arrive at truth. So not having those standards and them really well known, let's just take our journalistic or mainstream media. So if we were able to have some way to enforce standards as information is being disseminated to the public, especially when any of the political pundits are having conversations and engaging in each other's ideas, and the public is constantly seeing these things, this is where they're learning how they arrive at truth, how they know when they win in an argument, how they know when they're right, when the other person is wrong, how to deal with this problem or arrive at this conclusion. And when the standards for these things have been slipping for a long time, I think we can show over the last 30 years that journalistic integrity has been decreasing. I think we can see here that fairness are and in accordance of specific standards of how we do all of these things of epistemology arrive at, I don't need to list it all again. You get the point, is that and these environments we would talk about, like a Trump supporter, like a bunch of Trump supporters, there's very little standards in there. There are some. We're always going to see good wherever we go. I'm not trying to paint a horrible picture that no one knows how to arrive at truth and it's just all terrible behavior, because it isn't. But we're having idiocracy increase in our society because more places it is. Like, I'll give you another, just a more specific example. Is I was watching, I think we see this constantly. One of the more recent reality TV shows I was watching was Love Island Australia. And when the girl and the guy would break up and there's this whole heartbroken thing, I think this was something that we all do. We would go to our friends and our family to talk about it. So we go to error correct and problem solve. And so as the person that had their heart broken, this disconnection, instead of connection, we see disconnection and people are hurt and they're trying to figure out what's going on there. Too often the individuals in both places are not getting criticism of what anything they did wrong. Too much of it is really heavy handed into how the other person was so wrong. They wronged you. Oh yeah, that person was an asshole. Oh yeah, fuck him. Like, oh, I can't believe he did that to you. That's insane. As the woman complains, and especially if the standards for how they complain and how we question one another are so not there, then it makes that even that person complaining, they'll exaggerate things. If they know that they can get away with exaggerating the bad behavior worse and downplaying any of theirs, especially when, and also what if the other person does offer some form of criticism, and they do it even in a cordial way, because people's maturity to hear criticism is so low, they'll see them as an enemy, they'll attack back to them. And so we just have these standards that we used to have to some measure in humanity just continually deteriorating and devolving, right, almost like right in front of our eyes.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. First, I would say that those who are calling for standards are often not the ones you would want actually imposing them. Be very wary of that. I would say that discovery of truth is an emergent property. It's got to be bottom up. Um, it's got to be, it almost has to be, instead of we got these standards from on high, we, uh, we figured out what kind of works through trial and error, or figured out who we can trust and why, with getting our noses bloodied along the way, and then going from there. There's no shortcuts here. Every time people try to invent shortcuts, they become heuristics and distortions that you can get around and manipulate. You know, trust people with humility. Well, okay, fake humility and fake modesty came out. It's not too. People are smart, and just as they're smart enough to figure out anew what rules they should have, they're also smart enough to get around any kind of simplified rules we have and adapt. Um, it, Sometimes it's just basically how much effort a person is willing to put in, how honest they're willing to be with themselves, and how intelligent they are. And there aren't always shortcuts to that. And if you lack in one of those areas, having people you can trust uh, to step in and help you, yeah, but then there's a whole question of who do you trust there. I don't think there's any broad span way of solving that. As far as the standards disappearing from society, I mean, the breakdown of the family is probably the biggest thing there, because of these lessons about they say that well, who's the they? You know, how to deconstruct media, how to understand what is actually being communicated there, uh, and I don't want to say critical thinking because that in itself is like almost a meme at this point instead of actually representing what it's supposed to mean. But those kind of rules and that kind of approach were generally things which, I mean, in a traditional household, we'll just go were things a father would pass down and so on and so forth. Not to say it has to be the father, um, but fatherlessness in homes is a huge thing. I mean, standardized, simplified education with no fathers present. I mean, thank goodness for the internet because guys with webcams, you know, are often the surrogate fathers in a lot of ways, teaching those lessons often at a delayed pace from when they should have been taught, but allowing people to catch up and supplement in a lot of ways because we've been losing a lot of wisdom that we should have already had. And now we're trying to rebuild and recreate a lot of it. And some of it has to be adaptive because the world is different now. I mean, this isn't the age of radio anymore. It's the age of a television screen in your hand at all times. Um, but even so, I would say that it's not the worst thing that we're having to rediscover these things anew in some fashion because the world has changed, but we can preserve these things via the internet. Well, I actually have a lot of opinions about how we preserve and how we share this information with each other, but I don't want to respond to your long statement with an equally long statement that is nearly impossible to respond to. So I'll let you jump in here.
Yeah, I hear you. There's um, so much to unpack constantly as we both say things and prioritize what's important. I find these conversations very fascinating. I wanted to go back to the point you were talking about those people calling for standards are the ones that we wouldn't necessarily want making those decisions. And I wanted to talk about like how I saw that we had some agreement in our previous conversations about logical fallacies, that there are problems with them. This is one of the things that I think that we're constantly losing our ability to be able to see that needs to be inside of our society. That any leaders that are upholding standards like logical fallacies, let's say, or anything, axioms or heuristics or whatever it is, where we see the thing works, it's valuable, it's useful, whether it's like the theory of relativity. But let's just go back to logical fallacies because we've had a conversation there about having a disagreement. Well, the people that are in charge of those words ever being iterated, having this lack of ability to have certain principles that they need to have, like how our forefathers that wrote the American Constitution, their most salient words they wrote are even amendments and called them amendments so that they can be changed and iterated upon. That too often we're not seeing that all of these different documents that are holding these logical structures are living documents that we are all collectively knowing how the best idea is to rise to the top. So if we see a problem with any of these fallacies anywhere, when they're not working or they're really fucking wrong and they're causing lots of harm and damage, we get to do that, but we haven't done that. And so whoever holds those things and lacks the ability to progress their ideas and know how to do those things because they're missing certain key principles. Like, for instance, I believe every single leader inside of our society should have a great desire for others to question their logic for flaws. Once we learn how to do good form criticism very well, even to the extent of where one of the understandings we would have here is that all forms of good form criticism are loving the person that we are giving said criticism to, and it is not, should never be perceived as an attack on them and hurting and trying to hurt them or degrade them. That, as we can see, most criticism today that is bad form criticism is destructive criticism to achieve many different ends, of status tweaking to degrading, attacking the other side, mockery, etc.
Well, what would that get a leader? I mean, let's say that a leader was self-critical at some point. They're like, I think I was wrong about this. I didn't realize this and this. Thank you for pointing that out to me. What would be the end result in a democratic society? It would be the admission of a loss. It would be used against them i- in every and all regards. Uh, the incentive structure, and incentives are so important because if you, an individual might swim, but the incentives are the current. You know, the incentives are all towards the notion of infallibility. People want leaders that project infallibility, and then when obvious mistakes or flaws happen, the whole point is to have individuals who can then take the blame so that the underlying ideology, tribe, what have you, is never the problem. It's only the flaws with the individual so that they can be replaced with another individual. And so every leader is a puppet and so on and so forth. That's just the incentives of democratic society. So I hear what you're saying. I don't think that that is possible within um, democracy.
Well, this is one of the things that I think that we need to really hone in and focus on to be able to solve that. Why does the credulant masses, do the vast majority of people want and value leaders that show they're constantly infallible? And we can show strength in not only here in this example of people that are in charge of really powerful institutions constantly showing that they, as soon as they are wrong, even just a little bit, they want to see it to some great extent to be able to that showing that there we have a better view on failure overall in all of our society of how we ever make mistakes or admit that we're wrong, and that if we're not even calling for some of these principles and understandings and value systems inside of our own leaders, how do we expect this to be inside of the average person when they're criticizing themselves? How do we expect if we expect leaders to never show that they're wrong and never admit it, why aren't we showing this as a bad and terrible thing that no one should ever be doing? Like an example is when General Mattis, during the BLM riots, after already stating that he would never criticize a sitting president, broke his promise that he said publicly to come out and criticize Donald Trump, wrote a 2-page thing. Donald Trump didn't engage in any one point, not one, not even a little bit. He just did a personal attack on Twitter to defame him. The Republicans don't see this as a bad behavior. And this isn't about Trump and the Republicans. This is about anyone that is ever propping up a leader. They lack the ability to criticize and set standards by which we ever are criticizing each other. So we know how we arrive at truth. And we're able to call out these bad form debate tactics to a huge list of other things of how we ever want what we want instead of our leaders. I think that's exactly the problem that you're describing. I agree with you. This is what is valued in our system that we need to change. I think that's exactly why we got Trump. You want the person who will never fucking admit that they're wrong. They're the most brash asshole in the room. And that's exactly who he was in the 2016 debates when he was debating against other Republicans. He barely had any good formulated arguments. And he almost most of his rhetoric was attacking other people and trying to character assassination.
Yeah, which is just playing the game in front of you. Like that's the game. It's the sort of thing where I mean, with the cliche, hate the game, not the player. I mean, you think that like it's just the leaders that are this way. It's it's also even lower ranked politicians that need to always basically toe the line for party loyalty lest they also lose their job. Then it's media outlets that know what their audience wants and don't dare to challenge anything that they believe, and so they always have a shift towards an ideological sort of presupposition and go from there. It just flows downstream. And then in business, oh yeah, you could stay at the company and try and fix the problems, but then you're just the good employee that they just want to keep there. Whereas if you put in just enough time and then move on to somewhere else, oh now they got experience some other place, and you're not actually fixing as many problems or becoming invested in anywhere you are. it's all about upward mobility. That works for skilled employees as well as managers and things like that. If everyone is operating on what is in their own individual best interest, what works well for them in a situation which is about reputation, which is based upon appearance because it's all managed reputation, then yeah, the incentives are perverse. Um, and there's no, it's like, yeah, but you should be an honest person and so on and so forth. So should you be? If your goal is to do what's best for you or your family, should you be an honest person? Is it actually what's in your best interest? We could reflect this in dating as well. I mean, should you be upfront about what your biggest hangups are, and so on and so forth? Isn't that just setting yourself up for failure? People lie about their weight, they lie about their height, they do anything to get themselves in the door. Okay, and then they say, well, everybody's lying, everyone's being deceptive, and effectively, most people are. Then the honest person in all of that is a sucker because that's what the incentives are set up as. So I
I,
mean, you
I
can say,
agree with
yeah,
you.
you should be honest, but this isn't small town America. We aren't living in small communities where your reputation matters in that regard. It's projected here. It's about your LinkedIn profile. It's about your Instagram, and it's about how you're presented in media outlets. It's got nothing to do with the people who actually know you. If you're letting people out there actually know you, that's nothing but a liability. That's the world we live in. Adapt to it, man. Adapt. I mean, I'm kind of being a contrarian here, but
I hear you,
maybe
man.
I'm not.
No, definitely. That's how things are these days. I agree with you. That is how the system works. And so, one, I'm trying to bring up the point we can change this. It didn't used to always be this bad, even though anything that's happening today, we can go back 100 years and it was happening. I just think that we can also show in many different ways it's specifically significantly different with many unprecedented things happening in higher rates, which I don't want to go into that right now. I want to go into the things you're talking about here, where why I call it like why a good people for good reasons are doing bad behaviors like the ones you're describing about like inside of the dating. Like another example is there's a lot of good reasons people are ghosting, like they're trying to avoid this negative interaction. So there's pattern recognition, error correcting that's going on where people are adopting more and more bad behaviors because the environments are so toxic and the standards are slipping again. So this is why instead of standards and how we uphold those standards and value those standards, we need to change how we value everything everywhere. And being able to do that, we need to have a national conversation, which means we need to fix how we have conversations, how we hear one another, how we make sure those conversations are fair. And I think this is actually a really complex topic that I feel too many people. I do believe anyone, Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, Drewish, Thorsen, anyone in this room, we're all going to make really good points on what that would mean. Like if anyone here has a child, which I think Drewish and I are the only two, but what would you tell that child? What are you going to teach them are the good things of what to do and how to operate, and why are you doing it like that? For how to resolve conflict, how to arrive at truth, how to know when you're the asshole and you are wrong. How do you know that? When are you seeing how you're criticizing yourself and each other? What lenses are skewing our perception here of when we're looking into the light of a person, the dark of a person? I mean, how many times are we even seeing people being incredibly toxic positivity and just saying when they're evaluating their friend's performance or loved one's performance, it's perfect, it's perfect, it's perfect. Like our language, what we're idiocracy is in mass right now, which is the high rates of like bad behavior just proliferating. I believe we can understand why it's proliferating, which many of the things you're describing, Drewish, you definitely have. Oh, that's a lot of it, but I think there's even more of what we can understand by diving deeper into these. I think this whole thing we're fighting with right now is something humanity has been trying to push past for a very long time. We haven't been able to figure it out yet, how there's only a certain percentage of our society that are allowed to just be in charge and make all the decisions sitting on the thrones. So whatever standards they're upholding, they're right, they're true. This is instead of a household, 1950s dad, or instead of a school. And we can, so then we can see that wherever they're right, there's a lot of fucking good. But whenever they're wrong, they lack the ability to progress their own ideals. They don't know the principles they're supposed to have to change anything that anything harm that they're doing to their children or to their employees, or if it's at a company or whatever it is. Wherever they lack the progression, we see rebellion because resentment builds up because the people that are criticizing the people in charge don't know how to be criticized. They only know how to deflect, and not only there's, I'm painting with a broad brush, and there's definitely a lot of nuance. So we can go back and we can see leaders displaying actually some really good behaviors in their ability to adapt and be criticized. But overwhelmingly, that hasn't happened, and and I, anyways, I could continue on. I'm sorry I took it too many places.
I don't know why you're so caught up on the leaders. Why you have this issue with trying to reform the leaders? Because as I've explained, that there's an emergent selective pressure for a particular type of leader or people in leadership, and we're getting exactly what we'd expect from that. Um, why then would we even want uh, or and we do live in a democratic society, like most of us do in the West. Why would we expect anything different than this if these are the incentives? And if that's what people are selecting for, then I mean, the horrible truth of democracy is that, oh no, you're being enslaved. It's your neighbor's fault. That's the horrible truth of it, isn't it? That we want to blame the leaders, um, but really we're the ones. Let me bring up like I'll go into something substantive, the coronavirus lockdowns and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, me, I'm not vaccinated. Why am I not vaccinated? Well, I'm not vaccinated because I'm not allowed to see what the results of the testing for these uh, for, for the vaccines uh, are. It's secret to me what the side effects might be. The research is not anything I have access to, so I cannot make an informed decision. And so, if I'm not able to make an informed decision, I'm not going to do it. Like I'm not going to go through a medical procedure that is. Uh, I mean, doing that for a life-threatening situation, if I can't be informed about it, that's a hard enough situation. One where I'm not convinced where it is necessarily life-threatening. For something where there are particular like things put in place where the companies that made these things are not accountable for adverse reactions. I mean, all that screams, don't trust this, don't trust this. And then I'm not allowed to actually look at even their own internal research to verify things. Well, then screw that. I can't make an informed decision. So I'm not going to go along with it. Oh, but it demonizes me, and I'm being demonized for it. And, there was a discussion, which you can go listen to, about like, uh, parents or about doctors, like, should we approve this vaccine for kids? Well, there's some kids who are at high risk and we want them to be available. If we do this, if we approve this for emergency situations, that they're going to start pushing it for all kids, which is exactly what happened. And so it's this sort of situation now where I know the reason why they're able to demonize me. I know the situation, or the reason why they're trying to take away my my 6-year-old daughter's bodily autonomy, and enforce the notion that not only do you not own your own body, but your kids, you don't know what's in their best interest either, and the state owns their body. Well, how are they able to push for this kind of stuff? Oh, because my neighbors, because the very people who I live near, the very people in my community want that, and have been told that they need that so that they can go back to living a normal life, so that they can feel safe, and damn my freedom because I'm in their way. Okay. And so you're being oppressed. Yes, you're being oppressed. You're being lied to. You're being controlled. The world is screwed up and we're losing all these rights, and things seem like they're getting worse in a lot of ways. And it's everybody's fault. It's your fault for when you were younger and you didn't think about these things. It's the fault of every unintelligent, ignorant fool and every arrogant, overeducated fool, okay, who
I
know nothing or think they know everything. And in both cases, well, in the first case, might be not less mistaken, but and they think they know what's best for you, and you're gonna do it because that's how it goes, and that's the harsh, true reality of the world you live in. It's not just the elites. It's not just the rulers. It's everybody.
I agree with you. I agree with you that it's everyone. This is one of the points I think is so interesting that we need to really understand. Like, and I think we can do that by going through history to see any sort of social movement taking that allows a society to change any of their ideals as to how they're operating. So, civil rights movement, different ways of feminism. There's obviously so many other examples of this that it is the it is the masses and what they believe and what they value as to what is being expected upon it. There's so much power there, and I don't want to put all the emphasis just on the leaders, obviously, but I do believe this is a multifaceted thing where it is the vast majority of society plus the leaders and the ability to have open discussion and criticism. I think the topic that you brought up about the vaccine decision process of whether or not you take it, and then also the problem with it being forced upon us, and that increasingly coming as well, is an incredibly relevant topic to the thing that we are discussing with right now. It is there is so much there. We have a complex topic that we can show in so many different places that our ability to have a national public conversation about this topic, not just vaccines but coronavirus, any fucking decision. Vaccine is worse because it's seen as the incredible solution to the thing, so there's even more vitriol and focus and anger around the specific topic, other than even talking about masks and other things that I mean, our national conversation is so broken. How many? I agree with you. There's so many. Like, I'm not vaccinated as well because of many similar reasons that you explained. As to also, I didn't have anyone to go talk to even go through all the information with. Like, we're so like handicapped in that. For I mean, I didn't find a community like this that has these kinds of conversations. And I've been on this path for like over 6 years now, until about like 8 months ago. So this is all extremely new for me, and it's fascinating and wonderful. But even that has its own limits of our discourse inside of these, and to arrive at any better truth that we could have to examine evidence and constantly looking at all the different things and statistics. Like, I just heard one recently that the country of Gibraltar, 100% vaccinated, two jabs, with eight, like over some high percentage of them have a third one, and they have a spike in coronavirus cases, as well as some deaths. And there's like, well, what's happening there? What's going on? Oh, is it not that bad? And it's totally fine. Maybe it is, but even just the lack of the ability to analyze that information, that too often most of these things that we're doing it too much of ourselves. As the idiocracy is increasing, our ability to hear one another continues to get worse every day. And showing this in so many different places, I think that one of the main critical points that it's hard to unpack all of this, but we lost the ability to agree at a certain point 30 years ago. When the fairness document was removed, I truly believe that for conversations to ever go well, that allows people to achieve many different beneficial things of compromise, when we can show that we're wrong and different things like that, that there has to be specific standards that are being upheld. That was removed from the mainstream media. Journalists then got to get bought out, and the narrative got to get changed. They didn't have to represent any side. They didn't agree. The propaganda machine didn't agree with, so they get to spin it in whatever way, just constantly devolving the epistemology of what we ever achieved. Because there's data that shows that we had some good manner to error correct a society, though there's a lot of fucking problems with all of that as well over our history still. So that's why but I believe that we can show that the data, when we
Can I interject?
lost the ability to agree. Yeah, actually, yeah. Just let me wrap up real quick, and then maybe we'll just, because it's been so long, we'll just open up to open discussion. I'll ask Drewish. So I was gonna just actually, I lost my train of thought. So Drewish, do you want to just do some closing thoughts, and then we'll open it up to open discussion?
Sure. What if the consensus we had before wasn't really ability to disagree? It was that we had firm controls or there were firm controls in place regarding what and how we could disagree. So it seemed like we were having more substantive debate, but it was just the show, the facade of debate. And what if now we're actually striving for real debate and real discussion without these constraints? And that's what's causing this clampdown, this lockdown of ideas, precisely because the debate is going in places that we're not supposed to go. We're not supposed to ask these questions. We're not supposed to think these things. I don't think that there's this golden age of information we're going back to. I think that in many ways there was a lot of controlled dialogue at some point, and I don't want to go back. I want to go forward. I want the internet is here, and I am so grateful for the possibilities that it gives us.
I agree with you. My closing statements, I want to say, even though I voted for Donald Trump, I still think he's the worst president until Joe Biden. I would not vote for him again. I do not think he's a good leader, but we need to make America great again. I truly believe we had some measure of ability, and maybe what you're saying is correct of why you think it happened, how we had some more measure of control and ability to compromise and do things. But I want to explore that, like go down podcasts and figure that out and stuff like that in the future, because I think there's a lot to be said here on how we arrive at truth and conflict resolution and make agreements and agree when the other person is right and why we have those motivations. There's a lot to unpack there. So let's open it up for open discussion now. This is great. Sorry if it went too long. Who was it that said that they wanted to interject? I can't.
No, no, I was asking if I could interject in your statement. That was me.
Oh, that was only you. Sorry. Okay. No, you're fine. I'm my bad. Okay, but do we want to? Yeah, let's just open up for open discussion now. Does anyone have any questions or just want to add on any train of thought?
They're all just listening, thinking these are two crazy people. No idea what they're talking about.
Very, very possible. There's a lot to be said about
I'll
this.
jump in as somebody new to this server. Because that discussion wasn't anything like I thought I saw announced over on Canadian Atheists, where it was listed. But I've got an engineering background, in regulated telecom. I have a family that's been involved in medical industry. I've actually been politically active, influencing policy from local through international over the years. And you have a big influence in small matters, tiny influence in big ones. But most people don't learn basic rules for the systems, whether it's the technical knowledge or the legal processes. And most people are overloaded time-wise, so that even in public affairs where there's pressure for more public input to get involved and comment, very few people do. The internet has increased the level of fake engagement to the point where we have businesses and public agencies having people taking gamification courses and try to use that in engineering and medical legal regulatory systems to pretend that they have more public involvement. That's a joke, because you have a lot of noise and garbage that are a distraction and a disruption from people who have no idea what the systems they're entangling themselves in are. And then you have malicious bad actors. The FCC got 1.7 million indecency complaints for one TV show, mostly generated by a group of religious right scammers pushing for violations of other people's civil rights. It took them years to figure out how to come up with resources or strategy to even process those. And most of the people filing were felons. They made sworn certifications that they saw evidence of violation of certain rules in programs that they never viewed personally, and that they violated certain legal standards that they did not. And the big problem there is there's also no system to put 1.7 million felon scammers in prison, maybe they should be excluded from the debate more. But we have some very broken systems in terms of most people aren't going to do what you're talking about, and most people aren't
Right.
competent to, and most people can't become competent to, and of the ones who can, most of those are busy doing other stuff already. So how do we deal with that?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack. We're dealing with so many working variables of complexity of just how many people are not being educated on any of these things. Like I said before, and by design for that. Um, yeah, so many people are not able to. This isn't on the average person to want to quantify and understand all of these different things and figure and solve all of these problems in our divide. But at some point, they also need to care about it, and we need to figure that out. We need to come together. I think that we can. I truly believe that we can. Um,
Um,
Sorry, Drewish, you want to
I,
cut in? Go ahead.
well,
Caring isn't the same as technical competency, and even bright people can't develop that range of technical competencies, but they can develop some subset of it. But the scope of our society, just in terms of time and complexity, I think is more exclusionary than it used to be, even to bright, conscientious, involved people.
I would say that trust networks are way more important than heuristics here, way more important than simplified rules. Because even if you are incredibly intelligent, there's just a time limitation, there's an effort limitation. No one can do all their own research. So the ability to outsource that is important. But having the choice with whom you outsource your trust, that's paramount. And the tools which allow you to get there are free expression and the ability to not only to say what you will, but to be heard by those who would seek to hear you. Both those aspects. Um, Actually, I'll just leave it at that for that one because that's like the most fundamental. Any other one is secondary to that. And then when you can make your own decisions based upon whom you trust or in whom you place your trust, that's the most important thing. And determining who you trust, there could be heuristics for that and why. But I mean, I have my own areas of expertise, the things I legitimately really know the details of. I have things where I have cursory knowledge, where I've got pretty good BS detection because you'd have to go pretty deep in the weeds. But you could fool me, but you'd have to you'd have to put in your effort. Um, but most of the people who are trying to fool other people, save for those who are going after investors, and they tend to do a bit more work. But most of them go for low hanging fruit. The incentives are there that there are a lot of people who are very ignorant about almost everything, and so and everyone's looking for like a get rich quick scheme or some way to get one up on other people, which gives them, it makes them a prime target for these scams. And so, in those situations, sometimes you have to learn through the lesson of hard knocks. It's unfortunate. Um, but the worst thing that I found, and this is the thing that bothers me the most, is there are individuals who will warn people about the really low hanging fruit. They'll give people very basic information to try and inform them, okay, about these things, essentially setting themselves up as educators, as, public intellectuals, if you will, or something along those lines. But it's really a grift because they've got their own thing to sell or they've got their own agenda where they've got backing in some other way. And so it's a front or a grift. Which I guess a front is just a form of grift, hidden marketing scam in that sort of sense. And, it's a bait and switch where you think they're informing you, but it's all a measure to build trust so that then they can cash in on that trust. And so, even in an emergent sort of distributed way where it's not official, people are smart enough to figure out how to fool other people in this. And so, I guess the thing I disagree with the strongest about everything that you've said, Thorson, is the notion that we're all in this together. Well, we almost certainly are not all in this together. There are certainly a lot of people out there I do not want to be in this with. Um, and I think that the notion that we have to understand when something becomes parasitic uh, versus versus symbiotic in an individual in their relationship with the other human beings in their society in a legitimate way. That is sort of like the basis for what should be criminal, punished, and bad behavior. The only problem that is that our view of what reality is so distorted by so many of these charlatans that now I'm going to take it back to the whole unvaccinated, uh, scarlet letter, if you will. Uh, Even the notion of what should and does qualify as antisocial parasitic behavior has been defined to the extent that simply existing without complying to things now can get you branded as a parasite. So we can even agree upon that if we agree about the standards themselves. So reality is distorted to such an extent these days that uh, we try to avoid this political tribalism. We try to avoid ideological silos and so on and so forth. But considering the disagreement and disparity between various groups based upon just reality at such a fundamental level and core values, you cannot have anything even approaching a high trust society. But if you're trying to form even just high trust social networks with people whom you can actually rely on and call friend and not feel like they're going to betray you, you almost have to use an ideological filter at this point because otherwise they're going to come to see you as evil. They're going to hate you. Like, so all being in this together, I don't know, man. There are a lot of people I don't talk to anymore or don't talk to me. Some, I guess, friends, if you will, certainly family members. And that's the reality. That's what we're
I
in.
hear you.
I don't
I
know
hear
if
you.
Kumbaya is going to save us here. Sorry, I
I
know
hear
that
you.
was long.
No, you're good. So I don't think Kumbaya is going to save us. So my whole argument here is called the science of universal love, understanding the ecosystem of humanity. So from my view over history, human beings have come together with using many different things to understand the complex world around them. That has brought us to even be able to communicate over wherever the fuck you guys live to wherever I live. We're not in the same goddamn room talking like people had to in the 1800s. Um, so even just using on the vaccines and coronavirus and immunology, even just looking at all the science there are many different cases where we can see that us understanding that world has brought good for humanity. I think there's something inside of us, inside of human beings, I call the desire to know, that makes us and pushes us forward to produce very specific hormone chemicals of epinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, adrenaline, to push forward different cognitive processes, to want to desire, like, what the fuck is going on there, and I want to solve it, I want to understand it. There's so many doctors and scientists over a long period, like, have done so many horrible things. Like, so many doctors have done horrible experiments to themselves in the pursuit of trying to understand, to solve something, to figure it out. So my main argument here for this, of us doing this in Kumbaya, we've done it so many times before. We've had complex things, of unprecedented things. There was a time vaccines never existed. There was a time antibiotics never existed. There was a time we didn't even know that we needed to wash our hands before we went to the autopsy room, to the delivery room. That here, on understanding what is causing this divide, causing our inability, so high rates of tribalism and all these other bad behaviors that we're elaborating on in so many different ways, I believe with enough of us coming together, we can find other people and we can show that this is an incredibly important topic that we need to focus on. We can solve. We don't need to solve it perfectly. We don't understand how to make vaccines or antibiotics anywhere near perfectly. There's fucking problems with them, but we figured it out good enough. Just like this theory of relativity, in your paper or your book, in your argument, it is good enough to give us some tools. We can develop logical structures and tools of whatever we're missing inside of epistemology, which I think that we are, from my view, and we can iterate on these things. We can figure them out together. And I agree with so many
Well,
of your points, man. Like, so many. You talking about identifying somebody as being a parasite for not having a vaccine, which is what I got from what you were saying earlier. And if I misinterpreted that, let me know.
look, I don't get where your optimism is coming from. Like, uh, yes, humanity learns new things, humanity progresses, but I don't. It seems like you have this view that people generally want the truth, and life has not taught me that that's the case. I disagree there. People don't want the truth. Like they want to know, they want to believe that what they think they know is the truth. They want to believe that they want to believe that they want the truth. But do they actually want the truth? No.
Okay, but
Not a
even right
chance.
there, look at how much people are not being disciplined. I wasn't disciplined in my household for so many different things of how to measure myself. Like all these different places we can ever show somebody excels in life, and these different disciplines, intellectually, physically, or wherever. There's a lot of hard things to do and go through that we are lacking in our society. We're really fragile. We're really weak, emotionally weak, physically weak. So when you're describing how the general consensus is if people don't want to know the truth, there's a lot of motivators there, and I agree with you that that is a factor, it is a problem, but I believe we can understand the motivations as to one, why that's so bad today, and we can see it significantly worse today, and what is and all the motivations behind that. And we don't need to do that in this podcast by any means. We've talked long enough, and I really appreciate so much of what you said. There's so many points that I haven't been able to get into, and vice versa, that I really agree with so much of what you're saying. And go ahead.
I feel like
Can I point
Kashika wanted to
out
say
that
something. Sorry, go
I'd
ahead.
like to point out that the term people, as if it's like a blanket statement, like very generalized, because not everyone fits into those categories that you were talking about in either case, right? So when you say people don't like this, people need that, that's a huge generalization, really.
Well, I'm a human bigot, so
You're
or
a
an
human
anti.
bigot? Did you just say that? What does
Well,
that
There's
well,
mean
we
to
another
you?
aspect
definitely.
of that too. That sounded
Oh,
in
sorry.
part like a debate, between people who run. I have friends who run IDD programs, intellectual and developmentally disabled programs, and do things that have specific legal standards that most lawyers are incompetent to interpret, or that involve life safety technology issues. And most people should be hands off from most of the details of on both ends of the spectrum there, because they're simply not competent. Competency is, interestingly, if you look at U.S. law, one of the few discrimination criteria issues that is legally proper and not, a protected criterion. But there are people I know, who do not deal with many life safety issues, who deal with the IDD, who get indoctrinated in a stunt society to a kindergarten level, that it's more important to be socially connected to everyone than to be right about details. There are an awful lot of technology areas where being right is the primary, necessity, never mind consideration. But then you go the next step from there. How do we take down a Mark Zuckerberg or a Jeff Bezos as criminal, malicious, bad actors, when most people don't even have the technical competency to review all of the illegal, whether fraud or unsafe, dangerous technology, or taking down truthful negative reviews to engage in consumer frauds, or even if you buy something that's a consumer fraud, identify what it is and why. Most people don't have the skill set to do that, and we're being played by some powerful, highly financed actors. And you might want to look at another factor
Yeah.
there. A Canadian psychologist named Kevin Dutton has written one of two major books on psychopaths, the other being John Ronson, the UK investigative journalist who interviewed Dr. Hare. But he goes on at length investigating how we elevate people who possibly belong in locked wards or prisons, to leadership positions in politics and corporation. And that really distorts the idea of something I heard you talking about that I agree with, that there's a need for trust networks, but not trusting sick predators.
Yeah,
It
Well,
sounds like
that's
hate
how
speech to me. I
go
think
ahead.
you need to like check yourself, sir.
Yeah, like how like how they like there's statistics, right? They have of leaders where more of them have narcissistic and sociopathic behavior, and those are the ones, and
well,
even
that
those are
would
the
be the
behaviors
Clinton and
we error
Trump.
correct for. Like that's the leader we want in charge because of the
Clinton and Trump
behaviors.
would be the sociopath and the narcissist, but the psychopaths can be even worse and be elevated in ways that people they're abusing have even more trouble recognizing.
Yeah, there's something in our society that I that like there's this notion. It feels like it's in almost every area that we have in our society where there are decisions that are being made that whoever is right more often, that's the person that gets to be on the throne of making the decisions in that area. So it's a group of friends, it's at a company, it's in a household. So anyone, if somebody is, so let's say instead of a company, if a subordinate is more right more often on things, people want to replace the leader with that person. So it threatens the leader. So the leader doesn't want to, like, does lack of integrity, ways of engaging in the person's claims to discredit them and downplay them and strawman them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yet they have a specific motive because of this myopic understanding of whoever's right more often gets the seat.
Define your terms when they're disparate standards where I tend to be right a lot on technology or law, and information issues, and I intentionally violate what some of those friends call is right in terms of the social standards when they push what are properly illegal discrimination, civil or criminal frauds, or just incompetency with the, adverse consequences. I do not have a lot of respect for substituting, social connection standards in those fields. I think they should be destroyed.
I
So who's right?
There's more to go here, and I do agree, Thorson, that we should probably do. This should be the first of a couple of these, for sure. Um, I do have other questions I want to ask Lukavi specifically, but I kind of want to ask after we're done recording. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no problem. Absolutely. Did you want to
So,
just wrap up with any closing statements or anything, Drewish?
oh, I think we've spoken
Yeah,
long enough. I think people
yeah,
got the
we have.
gist.